Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 45 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back to Ghost Talk Radio. With me as your host, Shelly Robertson. If you just tuned in, I invite you to all join me in chat at WBHM-DB.com, where you can ask me any question you might have. If you missed the first part of the show, no worries. You can catch the full show archive on Spreaker, Google Play, iTunes, and iHeartRadio at your leisure. So tonight, I've been talking about female serial killers and the history and hauntings that go along with them. And I tell you folks, while I am only able to cover just a few during tonight's broadcast, I will let you know there is no shortage of serial killers to talk about. You know, as we stated earlier, statistically, it is said that the men serial killers are more terrifying than women serial killers. However, I beg to differ. And after you listen to about a few of these tonight, what do all of you out there think about this? I'm thinking it to be kind of the opposite due to the fact that it could be your own mother who winds up killing you, or you might be at the hospital sick and trying to get well, while on the sidelines your nurse is actually poisoning you and watching your demise. The thought of these two scenarios seems pretty terrifying to me, because those are the people you should be able to trust the most. So, let's step up to a more modern day female serial killer, shall we, folks? And I'm sure you all will have heard of her. Most of you, probably. I mean, her case was sprawled across everything. I would say she is probably one of the most famous female serial killers, and that is none other than Eileen Wuornos. I know you've heard of her. There have been documentaries made about her. She made a documentary with herself prior to her execution. There's been movies and books, and her case is actually a classic on what makes a person become a serial killer. The crime sprees that she had through her whole entire life and her history, and the case itself is quite detailed. She was born February 29th, 1956 in Troy, Michigan. Now, Eileen, she never met her father. He was incarcerated at the time of her birth, and her father was actually diagnosed with schizophrenia. Later, her father was convicted of sex crimes against children, and eventually he committed suicide by hanging himself in prison on January 30th, 1969. So, and I've always thought that, behavior is not just learned, it's also inherited. Because I've seen cases where people have been adopted out and maybe later found their adopted parents, their real parents, or biological parents, I mean. But the habits and mannerisms are the same. I think some of this is inherited behavior. And then, of course, with circumstance, it just amps it up, So, in January of 1960, when Eileen was almost 4 years old, her mother, Diane, abandoned her and her brother. All right? She left them with their maternal grandparents, who legally adopted Keith and Eileen in March of 1960. By the time Eileen was 11, And this is just craziness. What 11-year-olds think about this unless they have, of course, been abused. Eileen began engaging in sexual activities in school in exchange for cigarettes, drugs, excuse me, and sometimes even food. And this is something else stunning. She also engaged in sexual activities with her brother. She had stated that her grandfather was an alcoholic and he sexually assaulted and beat her when she was a child. When Eileen was 15, by this time her grandmother passed away of liver failure. She had had a baby out of wedlock and it was put up for an adoption, and she had also quit school. And this is when her grandfather finally threw her out of the house, and she began supporting herself as a prostitute, and she began living in the woods near her old home. Quite sad, right? In 1976, Eileen hitchhiked to Florida, where she met this 69-year-old man. His name was Louis Fell, and he was a president of a yacht club there, okay? So he's a big to-do and had a lot of money. So they got married quickly, and their marriage announcements was printed all over the society pages, and everything was grand, right? And it looked like, things could have made a fantastic turn for Eileen, but there was a huge age gap there, and that may be for lack of father figure. What had happened was, while they were married, she started getting into several confrontations at a local bar, and finally she was arrested, and she was briefly jailed for assault, and she even ended up assaulting her 69-year-old husband with his own cane. So this caused him, of course, to get a restraining order against her, and this was all within a few weeks of their marriage, which is very sad. Now, in all, there were 7 men who were killed within a period of 12 months, all right? There was this guy, Richard Mallory. He was 51, and this happened in November 30th, 1989, and it was in Clearwater, Florida, and he was Eileen's first victim. He was even a convicted rapist himself. Now, December 13th, his body was found, and he'd been shot several times. 2 bullets to the left lung were found, and that ended up being the cause of death. And this is the killing that condemned her to death, all right? And she stated that she killed him totally in self-defense, that he was actually trying to rape her. Now, we're going to move on to June of 1990. There was this other guy, David Spears. He was 43, and his naked body was found along Florida State Route 19 in Citrus County. He'd been shot 6 times. Then we're going to move on. There was Charles, and he was 40. And on June 6, 1990, his body was found in Pasco County. He'd been shot 9 times with a small caliber weapon. Moving on. Later on in June, Peter Sims, age 65, he went missing. On July 4th, 1990, his car was found in Orange Springs, Florida. This Tyria Moore girl, she was Warnos' girlfriend that Warnos had met at a hotel, and they got together. All right. She and Eileen Warnos, they were seen abandoning the car. Warnos' palm print was found on the interior door handle. This man's body was never found. Then there was Troy Burris, age 50. On August 4th, 1990, his body was found in a wooded area along State Road 19 in Marion County. He'd been shot twice. Then there was Charles Dick Humphreys. He was age 56, and on September 12th, 1990, his body was found in Marion County. He was fully clothed, and he had been shot 6 times in the head and torso. Then, November 19, 1990, Walter Antonio, age 62. His nearly naked body was found near a remote logging road in Dixie County. He'd been shot 4 times. January 1991, Warnos was arrested on an outstanding warrant at the Last Resort. And the Last Resort is a biker bar in Volusia County. Police located Moore, the girlfriend, the next day in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and she agreed to elicit a confession from Warnos in exchange for immunity from prosecution. She made numerous telephone calls to Warnos, pleading for her help in clearing her name. Just 3 days later, January 16, 1991, Warnos confessed to the murders. She claimed the men had tried to rape her, and she killed them all in self-defense. Right? Now, that's absolutely crazy. Make a long story short, she ended up confessing to all of these murders. She was convicted. She was given 6 death sentences, right? And she was incarcerated at the Florida Department of Corrections on death row for women, then transferred to Florida State Prison for her execution. Her execution took place October 9, 2002, and as you can imagine, there were reports of hauntings at all of the area locations where the victims' bodies were found, ranging from phantom gunshot noises to male voices, and even a couple of the locations, apparitions have been reported along the roadways or near the woods. And with that, I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on here at WBHM, our network, on Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. We have Fate Magazine Radio with host Kat Hobson. Monday nights at 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern, we have the Paranormal Pride Show with host Denise Pridemore. Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern, we have Paranormal Experience with Kat Hobson. They are all fantastic shows. I urge all of you to find a Ghost Talk Radio on Facebook. Type us in the search engine. Give our page a like, and you can see what shows are coming up in the future.